This episode of the Seniors Flourish podcast is brought to you by the Learning Lab membership, because I get it. I was working with older adults in home health when I started out, and I was the only OT practitioner. I was new, I had no mentorship, I struggled with the little things at work, and I was so incredibly overwhelmed. I was struggling to keep up with that paperwork, and because I was working such ridiculously long hours, trying to research best practice, find all the patient handouts I needed, I just couldn't keep up with it all. And the worst part is I was constantly doubting myself. Am I really doing what's best for my new patients? That's why I created the Learning Lab, because I desperately needed a way to get organized and have everything I needed at my fingertips. So it's cheaper than a textbook, but it has hundreds of treatment idea videos, patient handouts, evidence-based resources, and more right at your fingertips when you need it. So join today at seniorsflourish.com/Learning Lab.
Welcome to the Seniors Flourish podcast, where it's all about helping occupational therapy practitioners disrupt the norm by throwing away the rainbow art and being the best you can be when working with older adults.
Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Allen Cognitive Model and how to use the levels in practice. So if you listened to part 1, you heard Dr. Pat Cornille and Carol Luhman, both occupational therapists and former presidents of the Allen's Cognitive Network, talking about their passion and how we can use those levels in our practice. So this is the continuation from part 1. I'm kind of starting up right where we left off. So enjoy. Like if you were just starting out and you wanted to start integrating more Allen's levels into your practice, where would be a good place to start?
Well, this is Pat. I've taught this to PT, OT, speech, activity directors, all different levels at it. And I teach it as how it was developed. I always say, how do you think Claudia and her colleagues discovered all of this? They didn't have a tool to use in the clinic. They had to watch what people were doing. Okay. So, and when they started, they discovered 6 cognitive levels. So that was the first step. And then when they started saying, oh my goodness, you know, we're seeing high level 4 and low level 4 and high level 5 and low level 5. So that's where they started refining the model. They got into all those specific modes of performance. So I always say to people, first, just get a level. What level is the person in? Can you observe that? Can you do some of the assessments? If you're not confident about the score that you received and you don't have a mentor there, you know, describe what you observe. Don't assign a score if you don't understand it or feel confident. And then, are you seeing a high range and a low range? And understand that there is going to be some variability in performance. And some performance you may see more variability, and we can talk about that in different cases, but now you're on your way. And we have tools that we help therapists to just get started with that and general things that you can do at each cognitive level. And we know that our traditional rehab approaches require working memory. And, you know, once you're getting down into level 4 and below, we have to modify a lot of our approaches. So we try to set people up to say it's not an all or nothing venture. It's get started in the right framework, understand and integrate it to how you understand the theory behind it, and then you build. And like Carol says, all the magic happens. Magic happens with it, but there's nothing to be fearful. It's not an all or nothing proposition. Oh my goodness, I have to understand all these assessments, and if I don't have the right score, then how do I follow all these specific things for all these modes? It's much more fluid than that when you're getting started.
Okay.
What do you think, Carol?
Yeah, I think it's important to come at it with a sense of curiosity and exploring what the possibilities are, because there are a lot of variables, and and understanding the levels, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
For me, when I really got sold was when I would say, well, here's my intention for where I want to adapt the task, adapt the environment, and adapt my approach. And it worked. And what you feel is just the excitement. Claudia calls it the hum of the patient really being engaged and feeling successful. And what we're facilitating them is just so important, because we're not doing rehab then. We're human being to human being,
Mm-hmm.
just facilitating meaningful engagement. And we're in it. We're in it, and we're a part of it. And I was just so amazed at that experience. That's why I went into OT, not being able to describe that at that point in time. But it just was such an incredible validation that motivated me to understand the thousands of reasons that it could be variable, or it didn't work, or talking about it, or, just it got me through the learning curve. Because honestly, I'm sure I had to do 100 people with the test, and there was no pressure for me at that point in time to know a mode.
Right.
It was only the level. And I really encourage people to not get too caught up in the details. It's to describe the behaviors and then start seeing the pattern in the behaviors.
And Carol, don't you think too that, like, it's not a replacement for all the other great tools and things that we use? I see it more of an enhancement.
Correct. Yeah.
I like that you guys said that, because you kind of would assume, since you have, a history of being a former president of the Allen's Cognitive Network, you'd be a bit of a purist. But I think it's like acknowledging that, just occupational therapy as a profession is so, I think, dynamic. And it's like you said, just using that as a tool to enhance is really, that's how I practice. And so, but it's really hard, because when you start talking, from my experience, with a lot of people like maybe in academia or things like that, it gets very, not one-sided, but like very purist, I guess is the best way for me to describe it. I don't know how else. And I'm just like, I just feel like I, tap into so much, so many theories and so many things to try to do its best. Right. But so I love that. So I love it. I guess I love it because that's what I do.
I think it comes full circle, really. I think sometimes you get to a process where you can get mitered down in all the detail of it. Mm-hmm. But then there's an opening, I believe, that occurs. It's like learning a new song on the piano, and you practice and practice, and all of a sudden it becomes automatic and it's easier. Well, it's the same thing. Then this opening occurs, and it almost becomes, the best way I can describe it is how Joan Riches used to describe it, intuitive in what we do. Mm-hmm. We begin, because it's such a biological model, we begin to start integrating it in, and it strengthens other ways of whatever we're needing to do in our settings.
Okay, well, what about if, let's say, you've done a lot of clinical observation. Let's say you've kind of determined what level they are, right? We're not focusing on modes. We're just going to go with like levels. We've done, some assessment and that kind of thing. So how do we take that and create meaningful goals, or how do we apply that into like a daily treatment and goals? Because that's always a big question.
So when I think about the cognitive levels, and they if we talk about, a lot of people are goal oriented, but then we have trouble with the folks that are having trouble with that. So part of what I think it might be helpful to focus on are, because this is where this model really comes in handy, is to understand the term I use is allostatic load, which is just where their nose is above the water level, or whether they're able to tolerate my task challenge or not. And And so I'll give an example with a patient that is maybe had a hip fracture and we're trying to walk to the bathroom. So the OT goals are always, I'm walking, but I'm in preparation for my ADLs.
Right. Functional mobility.
So, yeah, functional mobility
Yeah.
for getting to the bathroom
Yes.
environment. And so if I've got someone who is going to be easily overwhelmed with that, I might be standing in front of the walker, eye to eye with them in midline, and saying, okay, we're gonna take steps forward. I might be moving the walker for them. Now, none of that's the Allen level necessarily, but the midline piece, as opposed to being off to the side, that pays attention to when they're really focusing and their attention is divided between balance and posture and maybe pain and being safe with the tool. Now I'm paying attention to their attention is going to be midline, because they're not scanning their environment. Their global cognitive capacity is challenged. And turning, this is so interesting to me, the turning piece. People don't pay attention. They see the chair, they start sitting, they're 45 degrees away from the chair.
We've all seen
right?
it.
We've all seen it. Well, in our Allen model, that would be something talking about not perceiving space outside of their central vision. They have vision, but it's their perceiving, because they're so focused on their goal is to sit. They see the chair, they sit. And so again, I stand in front of the walker and I say, turn to me, turn to me, turn to me. And I'm modulating my position to be in alignment with the chair. And then the hand goes back, hand over hand, until they feel the chair, and then they're sitting. And so that's a mishmash of a lot of things right there. But I'm paying attention to the fact I'm not on their side. I'm not giving instructions about turn, turn, turn. They're not perceiving that. I'm in their central vision, turn to me.
And that's why it's, knowing the levels and knowing where your patient is so helpful. And it sounds so obvious, but it's so helpful. It makes your treatments it's just easier for your patient, because they don't get as frustrated, and you know how to appropriately cue them or not cue them, or are they able to perform new learning, or are they not? Because that is, I think, a huge advantage to actually understand and know about your patient. Because you may just be trying to educate. Well, they have no capacity. They don't have the capacity to perform that. And then everybody gets frustrated, and they're like, well, they're not being compliant, or they're, you know what I mean? And that's
well, I think, Carol, you were nicely describing how you
adapted.
Yeah, and the hierarchy of cues. So we know at 4.6, below that, people are having difficulty perceiving the back of the world. They start having difficulty understanding what's behind a closed door. If their underwear is not in plain view, they might not remember to put it on. At the same time, they're perceiving time in increments of an hour. It might be very difficult to schedule an appointment. I needed to know this model when I was doing home care in a rural area. I could not compete with the Price is Right.
It's true.
And not come this morning, dear. And I'm like, I'll be done a whole hour before the show. Well, they don't understand reasoning. And, so if we know how someone perceives time and space, just in that simple sequence, we can figure out a lot of things. Why is mom sitting in the chair all day? Or, why did they lay in bed after they got sick from their medical appointment, and now they're still laying in bed 30 days later, but they don't feel sick? I mean, these are the types of things. Or why can't a therapist would call me in, I can't work with this patient. They're refusing services. And it was just because we were explaining things to them that we thought they could understand, because their language ability was higher than than their actual ability to reason or understand. And they felt threatened and they refused. So again, I think once you start understanding some of these basic principles, this basic hierarchy, then you can figure out a lot of things of what's happening.
A lot of times in rehab, I would say my goal was to support them so they could continue participating. I might be doing things in a very adapted way, and I learned a lot of that trial and error. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things that it's helpful if you've got a support group, but I didn't. It was just, this is my job. I persist, and I'm curious with people that aren't doing well with PT. I would pick those people up and keep them on my OT caseload. And over time, at the lower levels, they would learn by rote. And my goal then became to support the staff and to train the staff to replicate the cueing. Mm-hmm. And when I first walked into a dementia unit, a lot of times, the eyes would roll. It's like, oh, here comes that bossy OT.
Yes, totally.
And the way that I approached that was to say, I'd like to know the patients you're having problems with, and I'd like to know when the problem is happening, mm-hmm. and let me start there. And within 6 months, the staff was eager for information about what they could do different. And even the most skeptical nursing aides, were just kind of relieved. It's like, oh my goodness, there's help available. Someone's seeing what we're doing and the caregiver burden part of it. Because I found this particularly helpful for the folks that are having challenging behaviors and aren't doing well. They're not doing well with therapy. They may not be doing well with their nursing care. There may be behaviors that are really challenging. And so, again, there's patterns. Over time, it starts making sense. And my counsel is start building from the bottom up, because you can keep people engaged. And when you're losing them, it's too much. Scaffold down. Yeah, just ratchet it down.
But you see, Carol, that's an excellent point. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to even when they were discovering this model, when they, weren't having it refined. They knew that they said, oh, if someone's in level 4, we'll give them a level 5 activity. We'll give
them progress them.
Yeah.
And what happened was they found the patients were having catastrophic reactions. So they learned that everyone had a ceiling of a capacity level. And one of the primary foundations of this, what Claudia felt it was a therapeutic value to do meaningful activities at the person's level of ability. And so it kind of gives a shift in the perspective, but I think, Carol, how you describe it so brilliantly in your clinical practice is that some of these people, they get signed off of therapy because mm-hmm. we don't know how to work with them. We don't think they have that potential.
Yeah, and this goes back. This is the conversation that Pat and I have had for 10 years since we've known one another. Mm-hmm. Is I keep saying, well, I can do this, but where's the evidence that this works? Because the people in administration go, where's the evidence that this works? Even though, I have subjective results and so many personal stories, case history stories. This is the dynamic piece of the current politics that we're in, is that we need to, this hasn't been researched as much as it can be and will be. And we need to be doing our own little research studies and tiny little ones, and that will get bigger ones. But Pat, you've been really working with this and pulling into the literature.
And I also think with or without the literature, that the theory and the standardized assessments can go very far in terms of a clinician's ability to articulate what they're doing in a very skillful way. it takes subjectivity
Absolutely.
out of it. So we are, and it's exciting with the studies that are using this theory that are underpinning big recommendations for care. But I still think that there's a lot when therapists really learn it, they can articulate and most importantly advocate for people with cognitive disability or change.
Yeah.
So I think we're standing on the shoulder of giants, as we always say.
Well,
Which would be,
I think I love that conversation around that, because I think it's so true. Because obviously we need to be as evidence-based as we can, and it's hard when it's just an evolution of the research. How would you maybe give an example of how you would document maybe a treatment session? Let's say, let's use your example, Carol, where you're talking about your patient that wanted to sit down before, wanted to do that 45-degree angle and just kind of plop down because they knew they wanted to sit, but they didn't have that perception. Mm-hmm. How could you maybe give just a quick example of how you would document that? Because that's always a challenge.
It's a challenge for me too, because documentation, efficient documentation is check boxes.
I was like, efficient, right? Yeah.
Efficient documentation is check boxes, and this is a process-oriented documentation,
mm-hmm.
and it is. If I describe it, what I'm doing, it's a lengthy piece of documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to kind of think, who am I writing this for? Who is going to understand it and simplify it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I might say that I might talk about the factors of what's going on in terms of pain management and the time of day and the task.
Mm-hmm.
Or the urgency for the task, all of that. I might mention that, but I will say that I'm staying with that specific example. I'm staying in their central vision to give them cues, and I'm giving them strong proprioceptive cues with the walker
mm-hmm.
in order to maintain ergonomics, and their attention is on me to turn. I will sometimes say specifically, I'm not expecting them. They're unable to attend to a verbal cue to turn. They do not perceive space behind them.
That's a
and
good
I
way to
talk
put
a
it.
lot about what they perceive.
Oh, that's a good. I do not do that, so that would be a really good.
Well, that started changing things because now I'm inside what they're perceiving,
mm-hmm.
and that's not necessarily what I'm seeing. I'm going, they're unable to perceive
based upon
this
XYZ. Yeah.
Okay. Or they're unable to perceive that with divided challenge. So if a nurse comes in to do something, that's blown. They need to have the adapted environment of one thing at a time, one cue at a time. They're not able to distinguish in when there's multiple stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to find different ways to say it
Yeah.
and simplify it. I still am working on this. I mean, my documentation is perhaps too long, and my colleagues in social work will say, fascinating, but we don't know what you're talking about.
I know. Well,
I always try to describe my assessment. Like if for example, if someone's functioning at a lower end of 4, they might exhibit moderate functional decline and difficulty with abstract to concrete processes. And we may see difficulty with memory, judgment, reasoning, and planning ahead. And they're able to use the environmental cues of what they see to figure things out. So I try to describe that. So then when we get to the skilled treatment part, you can say, well, the therapist provided external concrete visual cues in order to train the person for proper foot placement during transfers. And so I try to think about, can I describe the underlying cognitive process associated with the level, and then how that will support what I'm doing all those great strategies that you talk about, Carol, all the time.
Yeah.
But it's based on a skilled, standardized measurement that we
Well,
do.
and I find it so valuable for occupational based activity, and it has so much to do with neuropriming and neurocognitive priming to put people in a groove where they can rest. And here's the challenge, and here's where they're resting in something, and they can feel successful. So I'm really modulating the kind of challenge that they're being given, and not overwhelming them, because it's so important to keep patients excited and willing to participate for the next person, and not go, oh my God, that was thank you, no.
But I think also, Carol, what that does is it sets us up to educate and advocate as well, because many people misunderstand these cognitive changes and disabilities, and now we have a very objective way of describing behavior versus labeling it is or blaming the person.
Right, because staff will say, well, they're not listening.
Right.
And I go, that would be right.
Yeah,
Let's do a visual cue.
And how many times does the relief happen for family members when you explain this, or how they understand time? Well, oh my goodness, we were taking mom out to lunch in the afternoon, and she was up and dressed with her coat and purse sitting in the chair since 9 a.m.
Right.
And now we can explain why that's happening, or why is someone feeling fearful or paranoid? Or why is the noise in the environment? Because it can't perceive people talking behind them. Where's that voice coming from? All sorts of things.
Right.
I think the more that we can work on that documentation collectively as a profession, I think the more it will carry us to justify services and continue to grow practice areas.
Yeah. Sorry. I got excited.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there was a couple points that you made that I kind of wanted to reiterate, like talking about how sometimes you try, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but basically you try something and then sometimes it doesn't really work and you have to adjust it, right? Or depending on what's kind of going on. And I think it's important for people to kind of understand that you can document if something doesn't work or it's not going well, and why you feel like that wasn't maybe the best intervention and what you're going to try the next time. And because I think people really worry about denials or not making progress. And, as long as you're explaining and justifying, discussing, however you want to put it, what your mentality is and why you decided to try it this way, and then you're like, okay, that did not work, we're going to shift it to this, it's completely okay. Especially, when we're talking about cognition, it's not black and white, it's not a broken bone, it's a little bit, it's not so linear. But yeah,
sometimes when some of my goals have to do with preventing the catastrophic reaction that has been 100% of what everybody else has gotten. And what I'm doing is an adapted something, and I'm looking at what is an aggravation and beyond their ability to attend to that task, and I'm targeting, but my goal is avoid the catastrophic reaction. And so my goals are ADL goals, and I've got a few open boxes that I can type in whatever I want.
Right.
They're very weird some of the times that what I'm putting in there, but is it essential for their care plan? Yeah, they're falling through the cracks. And this will speak to that.
How do we use the model for recommendations in discharge planning, or how can we use it to support our observations and the patient's needs?
I think it speaks a lot to the level of supervision that people need, in terms of, do they need, and especially if you've got, a cognitive level for a person who's an adult with a developmental disability versus a person who's had a PhD and is had a stroke or and then a hip fracture, and then a depression on top of that. We've got 2 different sets of life circumstances, very different in terms of what their procedural memory might be and what kind of support they've always had. So this talks, I think the Allen levels can pretty specifically talk about what their best ability to function is, and what we know they're able to do, because an OT is probably more likely to just see how they get up from bed without saying, here's your walker.
But I think too that the model, the development, and it has a huge wealth of information on safety recommendations.
Yes.
Based on predictive validity from, again, the underlying premise of the development of the model was through task analysis. So if we know what the person's capacity to learn is, what their best ability to function is, we interpret what environment they're in. Is it a dynamic changing environment, and what type of supports they have, we can begin to start making clinical recommendations for the next step in treatment or a living environment, or sometimes we make recommendations for they need to be doing more because they have the capacity and the environment isn't supporting that as for a health purpose. And what always intrigued me about Claudia, what drew me to her and her work, was she would always say, with new learning comes new responsibility. So we have to step up and take that responsibility to make, maybe we have to start the difficult conversation about driving, or safety about living home alone. But again, I think use of that puts it's a great role and a great need of service, especially for older adults or chronically ill adults.
So many times what I find, and I wouldn't have had the confidence to do this when I was first learning the model, but over years and just seeing how it works, and then being validated by the families, and sometimes in the work setting, but more often the families who are living with 24/7, where they are touched and they're going, you're the first person to see, you're the first person to say what my life is like, and appreciate my agony, just my heartache about not being able to respectfully, consistently serve my mother, my father. They're making me crazy. It's so hard. And so that really added a lot to it, to my confidence to say this, but really talking to folks about these next steps, what's coming down the future. It's like, this may be a warning sign, but the shot's been fired. There's no turning back, and so the families will say, well, how do you know that? And they go, because this is what we've been feeling. But how could you know that? You just met them. And I'm going, because I've seen the pattern now, so many decades of being curious about the folks and really what happens. And I live in a small community. This is the value of the small community. I hear the stories. I hear the stories of what happened.
Right.
And so I have the backstory that a clinician would never have, about was it successful or not. But all of that starts to build confidence about making the recommendations and really just saying, well, these are guidelines. Everyone has free will to do this, but there's more support needed, and the support might look like this.
But I think you make a great point too, because you're describing again those predictable patterns.
Right.
And then we can interpret it based on the person's condition, medication, and those types of things. But it just brings me back to a time when I was working in a mental health setting, acute hospital setting, and my job was to make safety assessments and predictions for, can they go home alone or where should they go? And when I started, they didn't know what an Allen level was or an Allen model. And all the doctors, they just were secretly hoping that I would say they need to go to a nursing home and we're done. And that wasn't the case. That wasn't the desire of the family, the desire of the person. So I was able to take these levels and predict the areas that would be high risk for them, and then we could offer other solutions other than going to a nursing home, because some people were not going to go anyway, whether they were safe or not. So it was really useful. And in doing so, I was able to educate several psychiatrists about the value of that. We ended up just having so many referrals and hiring more people and everything, and training everyone in the hospital and home care, because they found it to be really, really helpful that way.
Yeah, I think.
Don't you think it has to do with OTs really seeing things as not necessarily black or white, and we really see the complexities and the how things are sometimes fluid and dynamic, and some things are incredibly static and not going to change. But we see a really broad spectrum of who people are and how they're functioning in all of the variables.
Yes, and we also have a very skilled way to determine that. It's with a lot of backing to substantiate what we see.
Right.
Because I would have never had the confidence to
Me
take
either.
recommendations, plus from a liability perspective as well.
I know, that's what I think a lot of people, we worry about. You're like, oh, from a liability perspective, you're like, oh man, I hope, but having that, one, experience, but also having that confidence in the theory and understanding how it works, I think it really can build confidence in making those discharge recommendations. I feel like that is one of, well, there's lots of things about the Allens that I really like, but I mean, I think when you're able to confidently say that because you know what level they are, that you can make those recommendations, it's so much easier. But I think the other point that you both were making was talking about once you start making that progress with those patients in the facilities, then people kind of start coming to you and they start appreciating it. You don't get the eye rolls.
Right.
There's a learning curve for the staff, and I totally understand that. Because I've even found it really helpful for like fellow like PTs in our department, where they're just, they're not cueing them appropriately because they haven't done a cognitive assessment, right? And so they're getting frustrated too. And so, there's a little buy-in there, and then you get with the, but just going at the approach of, I'm here to be helpful and help you with your hardest patients. And then seeing the results, I think, can really help with the buy-in, because I feel like, I know from my experience is like you go in there and you're like, okay, I'm going to start doing this. And it just is hard to get people on board. So do you have any other recommendations on how, I guess it's just education and kind of just like showing the results a bit.
Yes, I always say if you can work side by side with your team and show them, and I do a lot of seminars and dementia training, and I just, instead of going through a checklist of what's happening, I explain the features of what's happening, and then I give a case study to say, okay, well, no one could work with her. She was refusing everything. She was sitting in the chair all day. She was processing time in increments of an hour. And, so I kind of illuminate to them what was going through my head and how we got this person to do things. And that's where we start getting a lot of referrals, because if we can help, whether it's caregivers, other professionals, other staff members, have success with people and see whether it's challenging behaviors or lack of motivation or apathy, then I believe that they become enlightened. And my experience has been that they enjoy the learning process too.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I don't do a lot of work in the therapy gyms for a lot of reasons, but a lot of times if I have the opportunity to work in natural context, in the context of caregivers, we can accomplish treatment and education simultaneously while demonstrating.
Oh, I do too. I'm always that therapist. They're like, what is Matt? She's never in the gym. Because I just feel like as natural as you can, let's say in a hospital or nursing environment. At least they have their own clothes there and some of the pictures or whatever they have. But it's like, and then there's like all this distraction. There's always something. And I was like, what is she? Where is she? I'm like, I'm always.
Right. And I always say the worst thing I could do is make a recommendation and not try it out myself.
Yeah.
Because it's not a cookbook. It's a process. There's always that skill and art of our therapy. And then we want to shape that with the other people who are interacting with the person.
Right. When I think about occupational roles, I was jumping up and down agreeing with in a context that's a functional context. And a gym is a gym, and I don't go to the gym, so I don't have a relationship with the gym. I have a garden and I build rock walls.
That's a great point.
Good one.
And I'll go running with the dog, but not running with people.
See?
So those are my occupational values and roles. And then who's it with? And I find the most valuable situation. See, this is so humble, but this is us with the 24-hour caregiver, if it's in the home or in an institutional setting, going, well, what's this like for you? What are you noticing? Where are the issues that you're feeling not safe, or you're being worried about something?
Mm-hmm.
And to go over that with the patient and the client and the caregiver, and to really target those things, because it is exactly caregiver education in the context. And I do this oftentimes at this point. I've got a kind of sort of plan. In the beginning, I don't know that I did, because I was learning how to formulate a plan. So there's a learning curve, but oftentimes it's a dynamic situation, and OTs have such a wealth of practical, occupationally based treatment strategies. But working in that context is so valuable. And that's where, for me, that's where the juice is.
And Carol, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because taking that a step farther with current neuroscience and where the research is exploding in this neuroplasticity and cognitive stimulation to strengthen our brain and offer cognitive reserve. And if we start looking, we talk about person-centered care, and we look at this model again in that will do, and you're looking at context. So if we tap into someone's previous interests, we're tapping into neural networks that are there, strengthening that, and we're shaping it for other new neuroplastic behavior. So, it goes into our term of neurooccupation, but I think this is where this model really nicely dovetails in the area of neuroscience that is really exploding. So we have a lot to offer.
And we occupational therapy practitioners have such a unique perspective. And I think this really, I think this model really highlights that, because we're not only just looking at the cognition, we're not doing just like a pen and paper, you know what I mean? Like evaluation. We're looking at how we interact and function in our environment and what are the occupations that we need to perform daily. And it's just, I just find it very, now over the years that I'm comfortable with it, I just find it such a reassuring theory that I can, feel like I can have that clinical observation, and I can use that to make good, solid, confidence recommendations, because I think those are some of the things that I always had trouble with, and that, like you said, there's that learning curve. But once you kind of get into it, I feel like it really made me a much more confident clinician. So
That's great.
yeah.
It's such a dynamic model.
Yeah.
I'm always learning something from it.
Yeah.
Forward with it.
If you had, if there are any listeners out there that really want to learn more about the Allen models, do you have any recommendations on books, resources? I know we'll talk a little bit about your course that you guys you're doing, Pat, and but do you have any like websites? I suppose Allen Cognitive Network.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah,
and on that there are the routine task inventory is still free, open source on that.
Okay.
And there's lots of good information. There's every other year there's a conference that the network gets together and they present research, and a great place for camaraderie and immersion. That was how Pat and I met at one of the conferences, and have been fast friends ever since. Because, and part of that's just because we wanted the validation of talking to somebody who's crazy excited about it.
Oh, that's like that's why I love OT conferences anyway. It's like, oh, you get to talk to other OTs about OT things.
but we bought all the books. Delon Pollard from Australia had several books out. Allen Cognitive Levels, Meeting the Challenge of Client-Focused Service. She has one on a cognitive link, managing problematic bodily behavior. Excellent book. We still like the old-fashioned ones. We call them by colors, the red and gray, understanding cognitive performance mode. I don't know, over the years I've gone through, I don't know how many. The OT treatment goals for the physically and cognitively disabled. You can get that on the AOTA website.
Yeah.
So those classic books have a wealth of information in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say that Tina Champaign is another Allen Cognitive advisor, and her website, OT Innovations, has information, and she just wrote a book. Really, the foundation is still talking about this, but she talks about sensory modulation. She just has a new book out on dementia.
I have that. I just bought that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
But
that's
another
good.
Allen Cognitive advisor there.
Yeah, I'll put a lot of these resources and things in the notes for people who are interested in kind of learning more. And then
There's also an app. Claudia has an app out as well.
She has an app? I
Yes.
didn't know. How advanced is she?
Yeah, she's working with a group in Australia.
Cool.
Yeah. I think it's ACDM. So we can send that to you, Mandy.
Okay.
Information.
Right, and we'll send that to you. And Claudia's version of when you get the app, it comes with the newest version of the Allen test, which is not leather. It's a washable, so you can take it into rooms that have infection protocols.
Yes.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
And there's 3 tests in all, so that you can do test, retest, validity, and you can start looking at this through different models.
For level 2.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll put that all in the notes, because I think those are the types of things that I love. Like when you're trying to learn more about something, you have it all in one spot. So let's talk about the foundation course, the Allen Cognitive Disability Model and Everyday Practice. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Pat and I have been talking about doing a course forever.
Yeah.
But this is the first. Pat's been teaching for a long, long time, but this is the first time we'll be teaching together forever in Denver. Go ahead, Pat.
Met with Claudia last fall.
Yeah.
Claudia's been a long-standing friend and mentor of ours, and we were out at a course in California, and we went to see Claudia, and we started having some long discussions. And so we decided that we needed to start offering some foundation courses. There's a lot of people who've been asking for more training, more courses. So we're launching a course here in Colorado that is going to be available, though, going forward. And it's going to be hosted by the National American University. And it's a foundational course. There's 3 instructors there. So we will be having a whole segment for people who want to work on applying it in organizations and dementia care. And from there, we're launching some online support and mentoring services for people who want to get together and continue to have this discussion.
Wow.
And we're also collaborating with Claudia and her group in Australia to continue to pull, to continue to keep the momentum of the model going forward in the vision that Claudia originally had, which was very compassionate for people living with cognitive disabilities.
Wow, that's exciting. You guys have a lot going on. If people are wanting to learn more about the foundation course, you said it's in Colorado, November 9th and 10th, I think.
9th and 10th, right?
Okay. And then where could they find more information?
Well, it's posted on Eventbrite.
Okay.
We also have it posted up on Facebook and on my website, which is Vitacura, Vitacura. So there's links on all those websites where they can get information about the course. They can email me if they have questions.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'll add all that information in the show notes. And
we also have a discount, a podcast discount.
We have a podcast discount?
Yes. If they go to Eventbrite and register and enter podcast, there will be a $40 discount.
Nice.
Of course.
Okay. Well, I'll be sure to add that in too.
An important aspect of this is that Pat and I were really mentored into being proficient users of this model. You know, before I went to the Allen Cognitive Network conference, I was an isolated therapist doing my best and plugging away. And it was really only through the mentorship at that conference that I felt like I had some authority to really be confident in my recommendations. And I had a whole group of people to rely on. And so what we're really wanting to do with the foundation course is not just give the head information, but to give them a context and a support group to come back to and celebrate their achievements and ask their questions, and not just of us, but to one another. You know, to really, I mean, you've done this with your Seniors Flourish. You've got a community forum. And I think that that's one of the most important aspects of how OTs need to move forward in the future, is in collaboration and to validate how unique our profession is and how many different ways we're looking at what other professions aren't seeing. We need to validate that information, and we need to celebrate ourselves for doing it and our successes, and really get stronger in bringing in all of these components that are required in this kind of challenging environment today to make it happen.
Plus, I think that's a great point, Carol, because we have tools that they can bring back.
Yeah.
PowerPoints, handouts where they can advocate to their team members. But we're also encouraging people to bring their team members to this course, because we have 3 instructors from diverse backgrounds, so that there can be breakout sessions. We have an instructor who is not an OT, who specializes in memory care, who can work with administrators, nurses, and other team members.
Volunteers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get it into the foot off the ground in an integrative fashion in whatever context the person's working in, so they don't feel isolated.
Yeah, well out of the medical model. I mean, we're grounded in the medical model, but we're we're trying to blow the walls off of the world that we live in.
Perfect.
That's
Well,
right.
thank you, both of you, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and your passion for this theory and topic and spreading the OT love. It was great.
Likewise, Mandy.
Thank you, Andy. We
All right.
appreciate
Thanks, you
it.
guys. All right. Thanks.
Have a great day.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Eh,
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Do you feel like you're navigating the OT world without a map? Not feeling confident or competent in your day-to-day treatments and struggling to apply your knowledge clinically? Then be sure to check out the Seniors Flourish Learning Lab membership. It has all of the treatment ideas, patient handouts, clinical resources, community support, and mentorship you need to succeed. Join today at seniorsflourish.com/learninglab.